This dynamic creates a system where our leaders are beholden to wealthy donors, not the people they represent. From super PACs to loan liquidations and beyond, too often are Michiganders left in the dark about what outsized influence special interests seek to hold in our government. Today we ask for that to change. We are calling on the Michigan legislature to unitedly do three things. Number one, pass budget funding to increase implementation funds for current, transparency, and fair elections. Pass a resolution calling for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to overturn Citizens United, joining 22 other states in doing so. Implement clear and concise disclosure rules for financial contributions to candidates. It is crucial that our elected leaders stand up to secret money and prioritize the people's interests. And we must do everything in our power to make sure our leaders aren't auctioned off to the highest bidders. Michiganders deserve transparency, accountability, and a fair democracy. It's up to us to advocate for a government that works for us. I'm now going to pass it along to Sandra Sorini Elsler of the League of Women Voters of Michigan.
Hello everyone, I'm so glad to be here. I'm Sandy Sorini Elsler and I'm representing the League of Women Voters of Michigan. I'm so glad to support the hardworking volunteers sharing our concerns with the legislators today about the need for campaign finance reform. The League believes, like you, that Michigan needs transparency in our elections, reasonable limits on political spending, limits on the influence of secret or dark money in politics. As you know, in a democracy, politicians are expected to represent each person equally, regardless of their financial status. But money in politics complicates this. When politicians receive large financial contributions from corporations, big donors, or secret donors, they tend to respond to the needs of these donors rather than their everyday constituents. Secret money affects issues important to all of us, from our access to safe health care, our access to good education, our right to a clean, healthy environment and to fight climate change, our right to a fair justice system, and especially our representative system of government. The League is committed to creating a more transparent, equitable, and small dollar funding system for elections, so voters are valued no matter how much money they have. We want to make sure candidates are elected based on their positions instead of their funds, and community members are empowered over big money organizations. The people of Michigan overwhelmingly showed that they cared about the issue of campaign finance reform last November, when over 66% of us voted yes on Proposal 1 to implement public financial disclosure. Michigan is ranked an embarrassing 48th in the nation on anti-corruption measures, and this needs to change. We call on our legislators to pass campaign finance reform this year to ensure transparency in our elections and place reasonable limits on campaign spending. Thank you for your hard work on this issue. I'm going to pass this over now to Asia Robinson, public citizen and DF80.
Hello, my name is Asia Robinson, and I'm an intern with Public Citizen and Declaration for American Democracy Coalition and a senior at Central Michigan University. First, I would like to share a story on why campaign finance reform is important to me. 7 years ago, I lost my sister to gun violence, and once I became an eligible voter, I fought for stronger gun safety regulations, but special interests have been preventing us from enacting laws that would enable us to fully address gun violence in my community. Being a first-time voter this year, I was eager for my opinion to be known and also worried that special interests would drown out my voice and the voices of other fellow Americans. Not only can secret money have an impact on our election, but it also places politicians in a position of financial dependency on corporations and interest groups that only have their bottom line in mind. More than 70% of Americans want stricter gun laws, but because of unchecked secret money spending in our politics, we can't provide legislation to protect our Americans from gun violence. I'm here to call to action and speaking on the behalf of Michigan students, pushing Michigan legislators to prioritize adapting campaign finance reform legislation to ensure expedited disclosure, openness, and to eliminate money spending and restrict campaign spending. I would like to thank you all for coming today and ask you all to stand with me and prioritize campaign finance reform. I'll pass it now to him, Myers.
Okay, I'm Hank Mayers, and I serve as president of a group called Michiganders for Fair and Transparent Elections, which we refer to shortly as MIFTY. MIFTY has been exploring remedies on the ever-growing problem of money in our elections and subsequent politics. I'd like to share some important facts about America's current finance practices and how they're affecting Michigan. Big money is big in federal races. The average cost of a congressional race in Michigan has grown to nearly $2 million, putting many potential candidates out of the running at the starting gate. The 2018 race for the 6th congressional race grew due to massive infusions of national money to nearly $35 million, making our race the second most costly race in the United States in that year. The overall costs of Michigan's congressional races literally have doubled in just 2 years between 16 and 18. It went from $40 million to $80 million, and it hasn't come down from there. In the 2020 presidential election, the total amount spent was $16.2 billion, which is more than twice of what the previous presidential cycle was. You can clearly see that growth is nearly geometric. Big and secret money is a big player in state races too. The largest class of money funding the 2018 Michigan governor's race started for what we now call secret money. In that same time period, the cost of Michigan's House races grew by over 40% to $39.3 million. The costs of the 10 most costly state races, they actually doubled. Secret money just keeps getting worse. Secret money exploded in the 20 elections to $850 million, which was 2.5 times the amount in just 2 years previously. And 84% of that money was spent on laundered transfers. Growth at this rate is only possible when big money is choosing to use the nonprofits to secretly fund super PACs. Politically active nonprofits are mostly fund transfers to other organizations, as it turns out, and predominantly the super PACs. Given their current right to hide the identities of their donors, they are practically serving as political donor money laundering machines. So where does all this lead us? Well, for one thing, it leads us to a point where we have stories throughout the country, and including the state, of political corruption. And it's becoming a regular occurrence, and is one of the factors that's eroding the citizen confidence in our government. Well, so what should be done? Well, first of all, as I said before, we need disclosure. Some legislative remedies that we'll be suggesting include disclosure provisions for all donors or funders of election messaging that is meant to reach the general public. We will require separate accounting for election activity by election active organizations of any stripe. We will make information readily available, with the help of the Secretary of State, of course, and up to date on the 5 largest funders by any of these organizations that are engaged in election. With transfers will be required to identify the 5 largest current funders at the time of the transfer, so we can begin to see exactly what type of money is behind those transfers. We also need a guard dog with teeth. We need to create a proactive state governmental entity to provide continual oversight of election finance activity with full investigatory activity. We also need to revise the accountability provisions that we have that will involve more serious consequences to which individuals will be subjected. Our rights to set limits needs to be restored. We've already heard people talk about the federal amendment and the need to get our legislature to tell Congress that we need to do this. In closing, our election money problems are having a profound impact on the people's confidence in their government and the ability of our legislative bodies to actually solve our urgent needs. We cannot allow this essential legislation to be ignored any longer. Now I turn the mic over to Christine Gregg.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here today. This actually didn't exist when I was serving, but my name is Christine Gregg. I'm a former state representative and former minority leader. I served in the House from 2015 to 2020. And I'm here today to lend my support to developing meaningful campaign finance reform. For too long, money has had an outside influence on campaigns, on regulation, and on legislation. It is eroding trust in our democracy. And that happens when individual residents feel that their voices are not heard because they don't have the money behind their position. Or for aspiring candidates who don't have corporate or organizational connections to help fund their campaigns. Or, as we've seen in the headlines this week, just this week, a former lawmaker, a former speaker, as a matter of fact, pleaded guilty in accepting bribes in his capacity as the head of the Medical Marijuana Licensing Board. And during my time in the legislature, lobbyists sponsored 20 lawmakers to take a trip to Hawaii to wine and dine and educate on the virtues of a bill that was on the brink of introduction with great hopes of passing after several failures in previous cycles. If not for someone providing the media with the lead, would we have known about this trip? The direct sponsor was a nonprofit associated with the lobbyists who were lobbying for the legislation. When confronted with attending the trip, many of the lawmakers would not confirm their participation. And because Michigan disclosure laws are so weak, they didn't have to. Over the last 10 years, I've spoken to state legislators from across the country. Many were incredulous at the lack of limits, disclosure, oversight, and ethics in Michigan. In Wisconsin, for example, individuals and PACs, political action committees, are limited at the same levels for candidate committee contributions, 1,000 for the House and 2,000 for the Senate. They have a bipartisan ethics commission established in 2015, and it's staffed with nonpartisan staff. Listen to the mission of this commission. The mission is to promote and strengthen the faith and confidence of the people of Wisconsin in their government, support the operation of open and responsible government, preserve the integrity of the governmental decision-making process, and protect the rights of individuals through the administration of the state's campaign finance, lobbying, and ethic laws, and through readily available and understandable disclosure information. Why don't we have that in Michigan? We need this in Michigan. Prop 1 of 22, which passed with more than 66% support, it's a good start in providing accountability with an annual financial disclosure of lawmakers. However, the underlying state laws for defining gifts and who can give those gifts are flawed and need to be strengthened. Even with the new financial disclosure requirements, those lawmakers who went to Hawaii would not have to disclose the travel expenses because they were picked up by that nonprofit and not by a lobbyist or a lobbying agent. So why does this matter? You only need to read the first 2 lines of our state constitution for your answer. All political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal benefit, security, and protection. When special interest money dominates campaigns, lobbying, and regulations, our democracy weakens and our state is not serving all the people. So I urge our legislators to take a serious look at our existing campaign finance, disclosure, and enforcement laws to see where we can strengthen them and no longer be at the bottom of all the states when it comes to disclosure and accountability. The people of Michigan deserve our attention, your attention, lawmakers, and your due diligence. Thank you very much, and now I'll turn it back over to Quinn.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you all for attending. In addition to Common Cause Michigan, I want to take a moment to thank every organization involved in making this Lobby Day a reality. American Promise, Declaration for American Democracy, Public Citizen, Reclaim Our American Democracy, Represent Us, the League of Women Voters in Michigan, Michigan Voices, the people, and a special thanks and shout out to Hank Mayers, the president of MIFTY and Rise Up Michigan, for being the catalyst that brought this congregation of advocates together. Before we close and take questions, I'm going to have Elizabeth Nelson come up and share her story. She is a public, or was a public representative from the city of Ann Arbor who was targeted by secret money.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Nelson, and I served on Ann Arbor City Council from 2018 to 2022. I attended this event today because it's really close to my own personal experience of how much money is impacting our elections. When I decided I wanted to run for the lowest local office in my community, I asked people how to do it, and they told me you're going to need about $10,000. And that made me gasp for a moment, and I managed to cobble it together. I was targeted by dark money in my campaign. It was a shock. I managed to win despite that. There were several upsets when we had races that were reasonable in terms of campaign finance. All of that changed in 2020. In 2020, we saw a huge jump. The cost of running for a local office in Ann Arbor tripled and quadrupled, depending on the ward. The city council that was elected in 2020, and then last year we had more elections in 2022, is the result of over $30,000 in PAC money flooding our elections. When I ran for re-election last year, I had worked very hard as a representative, and without running a single fundraiser, I raised over $20,000, which in my mind felt like a lot of money. I had won a race in 2018 for 10. I was outspent 2-1. My opponent collected $12,500 from outside of the city of Ann Arbor and 15 max donations of $1,000 to my one. Our maximum donations are looking very different than what anyone might have envisioned when they were set at, now they're rising, but in my election in 2018 it was about $1,000 for a local race. What it looks like now in Ann Arbor is a network of wealthy people where husband maxes out, wife maxes out, somebody else in the household maxes out. We have residents in the city of Ann Arbor who have invested over $20,000 in our local elections, paying for representatives in wards across the city. So I'm here to tell you that if you think that this doesn't matter to you, if you think that this is about congressional races or state races that are highly funded, no, it happens where you live. And it matters because somebody like me who is just committed to public service and is thinking about it, if I were to come up right now and ask somebody, how do I run for local office? The answer to the question of how is not, you need about $10,000. In the city of Ann Arbor, it's, you'll need about $40,000. And that is a huge barrier to entry. And it is a huge obstacle to our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. For the next 15 minutes, we'll now take any questions. Members of the press, feel free to direct any specific questions to any of our speakers, and we'll take some questions now. I think a key part of that is overturning Citizens United, but I'd welcome any of our speakers to answer that question. Yeah.
Okay. Fundamentally, and this has been done, is being done in Arizona and is done in California. What you do is you require any organization, particularly ones that are what they call multi-purpose, and a 501c4 is a multi-purpose organization. It's an advocacy organization and it's an election-related organization. And what would be required is if you're a multi-purpose organization engaged in elections, you must separately account for the money that you use in elections. And that's no different than some of the requirements we place on unions and corporations. The effect of that is then that the First Amendment right, which is all about the advocacy activity, can stay private or secret or whatever. They don't have to reveal those donors. It's in a separate pot of money from the election money. And having it separate, then it's if you will, indisputable that it's election money, and it's people involved in communicating in the election. And people who are involved in communicating in the election are required to report to the Secretary of State. So it basically isolates that activity so that it doesn't include people that have the right to privacy, and then puts them in a reporting regimen that absolutely matches the kind of revelation that you would expect out of super PACs, out of candidates, and whatever. It treats that activity equally to everybody else, which is an essential principle in American jurisprudence, is equal treatment. So, no?
I'll say that this issue is a nonpartisan issue, and it's one that primarily Common Cause is focusing on from a voter perspective and what voters need to know and deserve to know. And so we think that despite whatever party is in power right now, this is something that needs to happen, long since has need to happen. But if anyone else wanted to speak more specifically to that question, feel free to come up. Yeah, go ahead.
Listen, the contributions themselves aren't necessarily the issue. It's disclosure of all of those. And so when you have values alignment in different organizations, they are going to support those that share those values. And, that has happened whether you're the minority or the majority. And what we need to do, though, is make sure that it is reported and that you have the sunshine on it so everyone knows. Now, we obviously can still look at limits, and I think we mentioned earlier the shuffling between different sources and PACs and disclosing the main sources of the final contribution. Those are incredibly important, but there's a lot that we can do with just the disclosure and the accountability to make sure that you stand by the contributions that you did get. And I don't think we have a lot of that now.
Leader Greg, just a question for you. Good to see you. What do you think it says that Democrats have talked so much about transparency when you were in the legislature, when Governor Whitmer was in the legislature? Now that they have power, they have done nothing and have introduced no bills on these topics. What do you think that says about Lansing?
Well, I think what it says is there are a lot of priorities right now. This is 40 years of ideas and values to put into law. So I think it's a matter of priorities right now, but I have not heard from any of my former colleagues currently serving that it is not something that is on their list to tackle.
So you expect them to do something eventually?
I do, absolutely, absolutely. And they'll be hearing from me too.
We've had meetings with a bunch of legislators, and one of them was with the chairperson of the House Oversight Ethics Committee, and she is very clearly supportive in doing something about this now. And to that end, she said she foresaw holding hearings on this topic, and that could happen as early as before summer. So I expect to see some action this time.
Thank you.
If that concludes all of the questions, then what are the prospects of So the question was, what is the prospects of publicly funded elections and voucher program? We'll have to discuss that maybe after. So we'll be having lunch at the United Methodist Church. So anyone who wants to come and talk to us more, feel free to grab us afterwards. Thank you so much for your time, and hope you have a great afternoon.